Hi everyone, welcome to Intermediate Layout Design. My name is Danny Waters. I'm a Tier 5 support technician here at QuoteWerks. Yesterday with Michael Williams, you went over creating a beginning layout. You went over adding some fields and things like that. Today we're going to get a little bit more involved. We're going to be adding filters and formulas to our layout to be able to control how different line items appear. And we're going to be getting pretty in-depth on some of this stuff. On my side, I've got various PDFs, the actual layout itself, and breakdown of the different formulas, which we'll go over here on a sheet that I'll pull up. But don't worry if you miss anything. I'll have that organized in a zip archive after the summit. So if you do need any of that information, just send us an email at support@quoteworks.com and just say, hey, Danny, give me the stuff from the intermediate layout design session. So we'll go ahead and get started. We've got a lot to cover. So in QuoteWerks, by default, we give you some layouts. Some of them do have a number of different detail sections in them, but some of the simpler ones may have just a single detail section. So if we edit this layout here, we just have the one detail section. And that works great if you only have a couple of line items on a quote and you're not really doing anything special with them. You can preview it. You'll get your logo and everything on your quote, and then your individual line items and your totals, and it'll be fine for you. But if you do want to get a little bit more advanced in your quoting, and you want to include things like section headers, optional items, page breaks, things like that, if you use one of those simple layouts, everything does not come out looking great. You've got your headings in here, and they look just like your normal line items. And the page is just not very well organized when you're looking at it. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to add additional detail sections. And the way that you do that is inside of your layout. You would click the section button here and you would choose an additional detail section. That adds the section. You can then add fields to that section. And again, like mentioned inside the beginning layout designer session, you can add whatever fields you want. Whatever is in this page is what's going to go to your customer. So just make sure that if you want it to go to your customer, it shows up here. If you don't want your customer to see it, don't put it here. So when we add our detail sections, I'm going to jump over to this layout here. We can add our different detail sections and go through. And so I want my normal line items to look like the original detail section that we had in our original layout. I've also added a detail section here, and I want this to handle my items without a picture. For detail section 3, this is going to be my comments. Detail section 4, this is going to be my section headings, and detail section 5 is going to be my summary section headings. Now, when you add these additional detail sections, you want to be very careful, because the way that QuoteWerks works with our detail sections is we cycle through each individual line item in the quote one at a time, and then we check to see if it matches the filter for our detail section. If you don't have a properly installed filter in your detail section, you will get something like this, where your line items print multiple times because there is no filter in the detail section to tell it not to print a certain section for that particular line item. So we're going to have that exact same layout, but we're going to go here into our filters. So for detail section 1, I've got a filter set on this, and that filter is relatively complex. And it's saying that if the line type is not equal to 2, which is a comment, if the line type is not equal to 256, which is a heading, and if the line type is not equal to 32, which is a section heading, and if it's not a line type summary section header. So basically, we're looking at things that aren't comments, that aren't headings, that aren't section headings, and aren't summary section headings. Basically just our normal line items. So if it's a normal line item and it has a picture to print, we're going to print it like this section. Our detail section 2, we're looking at the same thing, except these are just our normal line items that do not print a picture. So we don't have a space allocated for a picture here. So if the line item is set not to print a picture, it's going to print like this detail section here. And because we've separated that out with those filters, we can handle those lines differently. So if we wanted to make a line item that didn't have a picture show up differently than a line item that did have a picture, we could change the font color on these fields. We could change which fields were available. So like we don't include the picture field here, things like that. And we could do the same thing across the board for all different line types. Now, on our website, just QuoteWerks.com, if you go to the support menu and go to help documentation, you can do a search in here. And you want to look for the appendix developer integration notes. If you click on that, you'll see a number of tables listed here. The second table here is the line type table. So when we're talking about those different line types, 256 is a heading, 2 is a comment, things like that. These are those values. So if you're wanting to filter on those values, this list can be very handy. Again, like I mentioned, I've got this list in those files that you can ask for after the summit. So don't worry too much about finding this in the help documentation, but it is there and it is available just in case you need to reference it. Now, when we're filtering against line types, super easy. There's only one type for each line. Each line can only have one type. So if you want to filter out comments, you filter out a 2. If you want to filter out group headers, you filter out an 8. With line attributes, if you're filtering on line attributes, so things like optional items, it gets a little bit more complex. We have these values here because a line can have multiple attributes. These values are additive. So if our line is optional, it's a 16. But if it's optional and it's set to hide the price, we have to take these two values and add them. So the value that we actually want to filter against is 18, 2 plus that 16. So it can get complicated. There are also some macro fields inside of the layout designer, and I'll show you that here in a second, that do cover some of these line attributes. So it does make it a little bit easier to work with. So we'll jump back into our layout designer here. Our section 3 has a filter, which is line type 2. So for our comments, we want our comments to print like this section here. And in each different detail section, we have a different filter that is located in there. And again, all these filters are in that file that I've got for you. With all of these filters set, if we preview our document, this looks a little bit better, okay? We've got our section headings, so they break out and they list, we've got our products here, our services are listed under this line here. We've got our labor sectioned out and our optional accessories sectioned out as well. And you'll notice these line items are marked as optional inside of the quote. You'll see here in parentheses, it lists each of them as optional. If we look at our actual quote, we can see that those line items have the extended price listed in green, which means that they are optional and are not currently selected. So that's great. We've separated out our line items. We've got different section headings for our different line items, but I want to add a little bit more. I'd like to add our logo and our heading information, so this section here, to the top of every page. So every page in the quote has this section up here so that when we present it to the customer, they have all of this information handy. Maybe we've got a 40-page quote and we want all of that to be listed there so they can easily reference the quote number regardless of what page of the quote they're on. So we'll go back into our layout. And if I want it to appear at the top of every page, as was covered in the beginning layout design session, you want to put it in the page header. So I've added our logo here, I've added our company information here, the document number. I've basically mirrored this top section of our report header here in the page header. I've also got our different headings for our different line items, so those will appear at the top of every page as well. But on this page header, I have no filter set. So this page filter is going to appear after the report header and also at the top of every page, which becomes problematic because we've included that heading section. So now we've got a heading at the top and a heading at the top of our page header section. So what I want to do is I kind of want to trick the system. I want to take this page header and I don't want it to appear on this first page, but I do want it to appear on every other page. So if we go into our layout here, we've got our report header and page header, same as on the previous layout, but this page header has a filter if sys page is not equal to 1. So if the system field page, which is a value that is the page number, is not equal to 1. So basically this section is going to print on every page that isn't page 1. If we set that, it's not going to print on page 1, so we're not going to have our headings on page 1 because they're in this page header section. So you want to make sure that you create a report header, either a new report header like I've done here, report header 3, where I include those headings, or you could put them at the bottom of your previous report header if you wanted to. But by splitting that out, when we go to preview this, now we've got our headings across the first page, and on each subsequent page, we've got our logo, we've got our quote information, and we've got our headings. And so that carries through to each of these additional pages. Now, that's all well and good. We've broken that up, but now I've got these optional items down at the bottom here, and I want to handle those a little bit differently. They look fine, but I want them to really pop out to the customer. I want them to see those items, and I want them to know that those items are optional at a glance. So what I want to do is I want to edit my layout, and I want to filter for optional items. And so I'm going to make this detail section 8 here, and I'm going to set my filter on it if the document items line attribute option. So if the line is an optional line, I want it to print in this detail section here. So we'll go ahead and we'll preview this. And so we've got our optional items here, and they're in green. So they kind of stand out to the customer as additional optional items. And I've filtered out my optional heading here. So what I want to do now is I want to create that heading for those optional items, and I also want to make that green. So it's going to be handled differently than my standard section headings. So we'll go ahead and take a look at that layout here. In my detail section 9, I've got it set up with my filter. If it is line type 32, which again is that section heading, and this is where we get into the functions. And the functions are a lot of fun. They are really what drive the power of a lot of the formulas and filters inside of the layout designer. So what I'm looking at is the function instr in the string. I am looking for a specific value. So I'm looking at the description field, and if in that string of that description field, the word option is not equal to 0, and so 0 would be like it doesn't exist inside of that string in that description field. So if that value does exist in that field because it's not equal to 0, then if it's a heading and it has that word option, I want it to print like this. So we'll go ahead and hit OK here, and we'll take a look at that section. So our section heading in the description column, we've got optional accessories. So the word option does appear there in the optional. That portion of that string does appear there. So if we preview that, now we've got our optional accessories section and our individual optional items listed below that. And this looks great, but when I'm looking at this last page here, I've got all my items listed here, and then I skip to an additional page where my totals are. So I'd like to kind of break that up a little bit so that I don't have my totals just hanging out on the last page with nothing else there to keep them company. So I want to add some page breaks. I've got some lines built in here that are just some blank line items that have a manufacturer part number value of the letters PG. It can be any value. It doesn't have to be a normal product line. It could be a comment line. It could be a heading. It could be any type of line that you wanted, but it has to be some sort of line with some sort of value. You could also, if you wanted to, instead of including these additional lines on your last line of your section or wherever you wanted to put your page break, if you used, say, custom text 01 and you put a value in there of like break or some other value, number 1, letter A, whatever you want, you can put that value in there, and then you can advance the page after printing that section. And so what that will do is, if it has that break and you're going to filter for that on your section, and we'll take a look at that here in a second, if it has that value, you're going to filter for it, and then once you print that line, you're breaking to the next page. So for our test here, we've got the letters PG in our manufacturer part number field. And so we're going to take a look at that page break. So at the end of each section, I'm breaking my page after I print that PG line. And the way that I do that is I have this detail section 10 here where it has a filter. It's just a blank section. It's not going to print any data. It has a filter looking for the value PG in my manufacturer part number field. And if I right click this and go to format, I'm advancing the page after I print that section. So when I hit my PG line items, I'm advancing the page. But you'll notice that I'm filtering for that PG value. But if I preview it, we still have those blank line items with that PG manufacturer part number field. So we want to make sure that we filter that out of our other detail sections where that's printing. So we'll take a look in a moment at that filter and how that filters that out. On this page here, if we go through and look at the filter for each of our sections, we've got our previous filter that we had, and we've added the PG value here to filter it out. Now, with this section and with this filter, we break the page successfully on each of these values, but on this last section here, my PG is in lowercase. So it doesn't technically match the filter, because if we go into this filter and we scroll down to our detail section 10, it is looking for the value PG in caps. All of the filters and all of the formulas that you build inside of the layout designer are going to be case sensitive. So if you're looking for a specific value in a field, you want to make sure that you take casing into account. Now, we could just leave it as all caps PG and then just make sure that our sales reps put all caps PG whenever they want to break a page. But if they're manually inputting it, there's going to be room for error. So I like to account for those errors in my formulas. And the way that you can do that is, instead of filtering for that just the uppercase value PG, you can instead take that field and filter for another function called upper. And to get a list of functions, if you click on that function button there, it gives you a list of all of the different functions and a brief description of what that function accomplishes. Now, upper is one of my favorite functions because it takes the string that I'm looking at and it converts it to uppercase. So what I can do here is I can say if upper document items manufacturer part number. So the manufacturer part number field is going to be my string that I'm looking at, and I want to get the uppercase value of that string. So if the uppercase value of that string is equal to uppercase PG, regardless of whether they put lowercase pg in there, capital P lowercase g, lowercase p capital G, any combination of those values will get us a true on this filter. So we'll go ahead and set that. Then we'll double check that on our filters here where the actual line item is printing as well. So we're looking at the upper of that PG. So if we preview this, we've got a page break at the end of our first section, a page break at the end of our second section, and a page break at the end of our third section. Our fourth section with our optional accessories is printing on the last page with our document totals listed there. And actually, I'm going to take a brief break because I see a couple of questions here coming up. So the first question from Erica, can you actually add these formulas instead of just showing it already being done? Sure, yeah, we can go through that. I just wanted to get through most of this because there is a lot of information here to cover. So in just a few moments, we will go through and we'll actually add those formulas. And then from JJ, can those string conditional functions be used for item types? In other words, can I look at an item type that includes a specific string? Yes, you can look at any field, any value, as long as it's a string value. And you can look at that specific string and filter for values in there. So if you wanted to say, look at video/DVD versus just DVD, you could filter for DVD as the first set of characters in that string. And so video DVD would be handled differently than just DVD. So even if the string has the same value within it, you can set it so that you're looking at a specific portion of that string. So I just had it set not equal to 0, which just means that it appears somewhere in the string. It could be position 1, it could be position 10,000. Doesn't matter. If it appears there, I want it to handle it. But you can set it so that if in that string value, whatever you're trying to filter on is in position 1 or is specifically in position 4, you can filter for those values basically in any string field. Okay, so we'll jump right back in here to our layout design. So we'll go ahead and we'll add some of those different formulas and some of those different functions here. So I'm going to jump back to my original single detail section here. So we've got our single detail section. That's going to handle all of our line items. I'll go ahead and add a section here with this section button, and I'll choose detail section 2. And for detail section 2, for right now, I just want to handle my section headings. So I'm going to do a filter on this, and I'm going to say if my document items, because I'm working in my detail sections, which are going to be concerned mostly with document item values. So I'm looking at my document items field or my document items table rather, and I'm looking for a field, and we're going to do line type here. So if my line type is equal to 32, which is a section heading. So I'm going to print this. And for this, I want to include my description field. So I can just select that from my previous detail section. And I also want to list the extended price. So I'm going to hold the Control key, and I'm going to click that extended price field. I'm just going to Control C to copy those and Control V to paste. I'm just going to drop those in here. Now, for my headings, I want these to appear bigger, bolder, a little bit brighter than my standard line items. So I'm again going to Control select both of those, right click, go to my font, and I'm going to set this to font size 14, and I'm going to make it bold. So now they're a little bit larger there. I'll just resize this description field here. And if I want to align both of these, I can select each of them. So I click on it to select, I hold Control, and I click to select, and I can right click on whichever field I want to set as like the master field. If I right click on this description field, I can go down to sizing, and I can say I want to set these to the same height. So by selecting that, both of these fields are now vertically the same length. I can do the same thing if I wanted to size my fields to the same width. So up at the top of our quote, if we've got the quote number label and we've got the actual quote number itself, we can select both of those and we can set them to the same size, the same width. Then I can select and right click that description field. It is where I want everything to be located, positionally, vertically. So I'm going to right click and go to align and say top edge. And that will align the top edge of our fields. If our fields are way off like this, and we right click on that parent there, and we say align top edge, that aligns both of those fields. So I've got those set. Now I want to add a little bit of color to this section. So I'm going to actually resize these fields a little bit here. And I'm going to set a background color on these fields. So I'm just going to make this, I'm going to right click and go to background color. I'm going to set it to use a background color. And I'm going to use one of my custom colors that I have inside of this layout already. Now, when you're branding your quotes, you can set different colors as your custom colors. So as you're going through, if you have a specific color value that is your your brand color, you can enter that in here, and then you can add that to your custom colors list here. So you can always, on any layout that you design, build those custom colors and carry them through, so that way you can always make sure that any new headings that you add to that have that same value. Or if you want to match that value for a comment or something like that, you can make sure they are the exact same color. So we'll go ahead and select that from custom colors here. And so I've applied that there, and I want to do the same thing here. Right click, select background color, and select my custom color. Now we'll resize this. And now, because I've built this detail section here, I need to filter out those line type 32s in my original detail section. So I'll go into my filter and I'll say if document items line type is not equal to 32. And with any of the fields that you add to your filters, you can manually key them in. You can pull them from the data field button here. I would usually recommend pulling it from the data field button. I like to manually key them in. It oftentimes means that I've keyed it in incorrectly because I fat fingered something, and so it'll throw errors and then I have to go back in and fix it. But if you need to, you can manually key it in, or from the sheet that I send out in that zip archive, if you want to copy paste it directly from there, you can do that as well. So I've got my filter here. We're not going to print line type 32 in detail section 1. We are going to print it in detail section 2. So if we just save and preview that. Now we've got our section headings. We've got our price value here, and then that breaks out on each subsequent section there. Now, if we wanted to add an additional filter to that, so like where we were filtering for our page breaks, we can just simply add an additional section. We'll shrink this. And we'll do a right click on here and go to filter. And we're going to say if that manufacturer part number is equal to PG. And again, we want to set that upper. So we can just, in front of our document items manufacturer part number, click on function, scroll down to upper, select that, and then close our parentheses. Now, if you don't close your parentheses, or if you have an incorrect number of parentheses, when you go to save that, it's going to tell you that you have a parentheses mismatch. And so you'll want to go back and double check and make sure that for every open paren that you have, you also have a closed paren. So go ahead and close our parentheses here, and we'll hit OK. So now we've got this set so that it will filter for those PGs, and we want to go ahead and format it, and we want to advance the page after we print that. And now we need to filter out that PG value. So we need to say, we're already filtering out line type 32. We need to say, and that document items manufacturer part number is not equal to PG. And again, we want to place the upper, so we can click in front of document items manufacturer part number, go to function, select upper. And if you hit the first letter, like I just did here, of whatever that entry is, it will cycle to that entry. So we're going to say upper. We're going to close our paren here and say OK. So I don't have to filter for that on this detail section here, because in this detail section, I'm only looking at line type 32. All of my lines that I have that PG value on, they're all just standard parts. It's a line type of 1. So because this is only looking at line type 32, I don't have to modify the filter there. But basically, anywhere where that line would print otherwise, you want to make sure that you're filtering for that. So now we don't have our PG lines listed there in each section, and we do have the page break after each section, including after our third section here, because we accounted for that lowercase pg with our upper function. Now, I want to talk a little bit about functions. With the different functions inside of our layout designer, they, like I said, are very powerful and kind of are key for a lot of the things that you're going to want to do. So for example, we have our company address formula here. So that's looking at address 1, address 2, address 3 of that licensee company. But if we edit that formula, we've got it set to trim. So it's going to trim any extra spaces for those values. Now, if we wanted to print this, this will print this on a single line. If we wanted to print this on multiple lines, the Addline function can be very useful. What that Addline function will do is, if there is a value in that field, it will break a line and it will print it on the next line. So if you're doing your addresses for your company or addresses for your contact, you can do address line 1, add line, address line 2, add line, address line 3. And what that will do is, if they have an address line 1, 2, and 3, it will print them. If they don't have an address line 2 or 3, or if they have an address line 1 and 2 but not a 3, it will print the lines that exist, and then it won't allocate space for the lines that don't exist. So if they have an address line 1 and an address line 3, it will actually bring those two lines so that they print one on top of each other without skipping space for the address line 2. So the add line string value can be very useful. I'm going to pause for another moment because we do have a couple more questions that have come in here. So this question is from Roberto. I see that the description extended price detail section is number 2, but it gets printed above detail section 1. How does QuoteWerks understand which detail section to print first? Is there a priority among the line types? So great question, Roberto. The order that those detail sections appear in this layout designer don't matter at all. If you later decide you want to filter your comments a certain way and you don't have your comments listed in here, you can add that detail section at the end of your detail sections and filter for that comment. The way that the detail sections work is it looks at your quote and goes line by line. So it goes to detail section, or it goes to the first line here, which is our section heading. And then it goes into your detail sections and it says, does this line meet the filter for detail section 1? If it does, then it'll print it. If it doesn't, then it won't print it. So right now, this is set to not equal to line type 32. That section heading, that first line, is a line type 32. So it just skips over detail section 1. Then it looks at detail section 2 and says, does that first line meet the criteria for this filter? Well, the section heading is the first line and it is a line type 32. So yes, it does meet the criteria for that filter. So it will go ahead and print it like that detail section 2. So the order that the detail sections appear in the layout designer don't have any effect as to what order they print on the actual layout. The quote itself, the line items on your quote, determine what order those print in. So it's going to go line by line all the way down the quote, and they're going to print in that order. Now, sometimes, like with these PG lines, you might have lines that you don't want to print at all, in which case you can build like we did with that blank detail section where we filter for specifically that value. We can have it on the quote here, but it won't appear on our layout. You can do that too with different item types or things like that. So if you're creating a proposal for your customer and you want to make sure that they only see the service line items. They don't want to see your internal notes. You can set it up so that it will filter those out. We have another question here from Rob. How would you filter out a column, such as part number, if a single customer did not want to see it, but the rest of the customers did? So for filtering out a column, there's not really a way to say, like, don't print this specific column. The way that you would manage that would be on the actual layout itself. You just don't have that column. Now, the easiest way to do that would be basically to have two separate layouts, one layout with that column, one layout without, and then you can print that. And if the customer does want that column, you choose the one with the column. If the customer doesn't, you choose the one without it. That being said, this is intermediate/advanced layout design. So if you wanted to, you could, on a single layout, have detail sections that basically mirror each other. One of them has that part number field, one of them doesn't. And then you can filter for a specific value on the quote. So if you wanted to, in like custom text 25 or any field, you could have a value here that says like no number or whatever value you want. And so basically, if you're creating a quote for one of those customers and you choose no number in your layout, if you're filtering for that value, you can tell it will only print those sections that have that no number. Or if it doesn't have that no number, then it'll print the sections that do have the number. So you can get as complicated as you want with it. The sky is basically the limit with that. But yeah, so hopefully that answers your question. If it doesn't, just contact us at support@QuoteWerks.com and we'll be happy to go more in depth with that. I have another question here. Oh, actually, that is that same question. So we're good with that. So jumping back in here to our layout, there are, like I said, a number of those different functions. Those are really strong. They're all outlined in my paperwork that I've got in that zip archive. So if you guys do have any questions on it, please, like I said, send us an email, support@QuoteWerks.com. Just send it to attention Danny and say, hey, give me the stuff from the intermediate layout design for the summit, and I'll send along that package to you. And it does go pretty in depth as to what each of those filters and functions does, and kind of explains the different elements of each of those filters and functions. But if you have any questions on any of it, please don't hesitate to reach out. Again, if you send an email to support@QuoteWerks.com and just send it to my attention, I'll be happy to answer them. Or if you need a quick call, then I can remote in and take a quick look at it with you. So, one more question just snuck in here. Using the examples I just gave, could you filter on a custom text 45 for is null or is not null? Well, you would have to filter on, custom text 25, let's say. You could filter for any value. So if you wanted to have a value of is null or is not null in there, yes, you can just say, what you would do is, I'll do it right here for you real quick so you can see it. So you would say like, and document headers, custom text 25 is not equal to, and then you would just do double quotes and no information in the double quotes, and that gives you the null value. So unfortunately, that is all the time that we have for today. Again, if you have any questions or run into any issues, please contact us at support@QuoteWerks.com, and we'll be happy to address those questions for you.